Welcome to Caring Connections. I'm Sally Gibney. Our show today is about a very important issue, advanced health care planning. Planning for end-of-life care is so important before it's a worry, before we're in a position where we have to do it and we don't know what we want to do, or our family doesn't know what we want to do. This plan is as important as any other plan you'll make. It's so important for us, and for our family, and also for our doctor. Today, I'm so happy to have with me Laura Vian, who is from visiting Rutland, Visiting Nurse Association and Hospice, and we're going to start the conversation. Hello, Laura. How are you?
Hi, Sally. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for being here for such an important topic.
It is, and you said it very well in the introduction that you want to do what we're going to talk about today. You want to complete before a health crisis hits.
And you have this wonderful booklet, actually folder, with all kinds of information. It's called Start the Conversation. So let's start the conversation. Okay. Laura, just would you share with our audience what you do and how you're going about doing this?
Well, I work for Rutland Area Visiting Nurse Association and Hospice, and of course our hospice care and services comes down into the Manchester area. Mm-hmm. And this whole Start the Conversation campaign was launched in the spring to get people to understand how the role hospice plays in end-of-life care planning. Uh-huh. Because, you know, when you said about do it when you're healthy, our hospice nurses and our hospice team see people struggling with this at the worst time. Absolutely. When a family member is terminal and there's so much emotion and struggle going on, and they're trying to figure out how to make decisions sometimes for their loved one. And so we realize the importance of doing this ahead of time.
And they may not even know what their loved one's wishes are.
Exactly.
At that point, you know, it's so very,
and
very
then what
difficult.
do you do?
Exactly,
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So let's get started. I think if we can go through this booklet for our viewers,
Great.
It would be really, really helpful. And I love this brochure that you have here, that what is an advance directive. So I'm going to ask you to tell us what is an advance directive.
You know, starting the conversation is the first step that you really need to take before you even complete your advance directive. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people sit down. It can be a bit daunting to sit down with a form. It's several pages. But we encourage people to actually think about what you would want in the event that you are unable to speak for yourself.
Before we get to the
before you get the advance directive.
Okay,
but
so
no, we can still go through it.
But let's take it as you would with an audience that you're with.
So as we go through the worksheets that are in this booklet, I think that people will probably start wondering, gee, what would I want in certain scenarios? What's important to me as far as value in my life? That's what happened to me when I was putting the booklet together. I didn't develop all the content, but as I was putting it together, it really did make me think, you know, what do I value most in life? What do I need to have a high quality of life?
Right.
So we put together this booklet. This whole campaign is actually sponsored by the nonprofit VNAs and home health agencies across Vermont. Wow. So this message is getting heard by people across the state.
Great.
So as we start in the book, it outlines what the worksheets are. And it starts out really by distinguishing between two types of care. Mm-hmm. Hospice care, which is for people who are facing a terminal illness and whose doctor has determined that the patient has 6 months or less to live, and will refer the patient and family to hospice, which looks at the patient and the entire family. We have a team of people that includes nurses and therapists, bereavement counselors, volunteers, social workers, but the person needs to have that doctor's order saying that they only have 6 months or less to live.
And there are times when it goes beyond the 6 months, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I get that. I get that question a lot. So what happens if I live longer than 6 months? Will I get kicked out of hospice? We actually had a patient in the Dorset area that was on hospice care for 3 years.
Wow.
She was a cancer patient.
You just never know.
Fought it for a long time. And then we outline what palliative care is. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's a big word.
And what is the difference?
Well, palliative care, first of all, hospice is a benefit that's paid for by Medicare. Okay. It's comfort care, it's pain management, it's symptom control. similar to palliative care, which is pain management, symptom control, but you don't have a terminal diagnosis.
I see. Okay.
You may have a life-limiting illness, COPD, congestive heart failure, Alzheimer's, where you need that extra comfort care. So I try to say it as hospice care is palliative care, but palliative care is not necessarily hospice care. There's a distinct difference between the two.
Now, is there any coverage for palliative care?
Not that I know of. Hospice, if you are referred to a hospice program anywhere in the country, if you're on Medicare, Medicare will pay for everything related to the terminal diagnosis. Medicaid and most private insurances pay everything for hospice. So I've heard people say they think it's expensive. Well, it's not. It's covered.
No, not when you
covered.
Consider everything is included within the rate.
Right.
There's so much included in that.
So the first part of that this booklet gives people an understanding. We even have on page 4, if you turn the page, Sally, there's a grid that shows the difference. It outlines it for people who can receive hospice care versus palliative care. What does Medicare pay for it? How long can I receive care?
Right.
Where are services provided? I've met with people from outside the state of Vermont who believe that hospice is a place to go to. And here in Vermont, we only have one hospice house in the Chittenden County area. But hospice can be delivered at home, in a nursing home, assisted living facility, even in the hospital. Mostly here in Vermont, we provide hospice services in the home. So this is a good thing for people to do. Then, starting on page 5, we really get into the meat of the matter.
Okay.
This is one of several worksheets titled, Are Some Conditions Worse Than Death? And this is where you really start to think about what condition would I have to be in where I would not want
to
treatment.
Continue.
And it varies from person to person.
Sure.
I met a wonderful lady several months ago at a health fair. She was in a wheelchair. She had only one leg. And she picked up our materials. And I got to meet her several months later where she said, I was so happy that I got these materials. I filled out my advance directive. If my doctors say I need the second leg taken off, I'm telling them, no, let me go. Now, this woman I met who was in a wheelchair was at a senior meal site surrounded by friends. She was active. She was interested. She was interesting. But yet, when she thought about the quality for her life, she wasn't willing to go further if she had to be in a wheelchair with no limbs. Now, for me, if I had no limbs, I'd be fine. As long as I had a lap for my grandchildren, I want treatment. It's
so individual.
Right.
It's so, and this is what,
and that's why it's
this
important.
is the beauty of this, because it gives each of us a chance to decide what works for us, what's important to us.
Well, for instance, here's some of the questions that it asks. What if you were in severe pain most of the time? Would you, and we ask you to rate this 1 through 5. 1 being, I would definitely want treatment to keep me alive, or 5 saying, I definitely do not want treatment that might keep me alive. So the question of what if you were in, severe discomfort or you were in severe pain most of the time, what would you choose? Your answer is probably going to be different than mine.
Absolutely.
What if I had to live in a nursing home?
Well, what about a feeding tube?
Or
that's
a feeding tube. And that's very complicated. Because I understand different types of feeding tubes. Some that I guess, and as a nurse, I know you're a nurse, you could probably answer this better than I could, but there are feeding tubes that people need to get them over the hump to recovery, and then there are feeding tubes to keep you alive.
Yes, and that's, again, it's a decision that's very individual. I had a patient in the nursing home who her family kept wanting her to have it, and she kept pulling it out. She didn't want it. There was no discussion earlier as to what her choices were.
And I hope we have a few minutes to get into that and the importance of that.
Okay.
So that's just one worksheet that you can go through to get you thinking. And as we go through, people might think, well, gee, there's some redundancy here. But it's laid out in such a way that it makes you kind of look at it from a different angle.
Because it's not cut and dry.
It is not. It certainly is not. And, I also have learned that what you want at 40 or 50 may not be what you put in your advance directive may not be what you want when you're 80.
Exactly.
So we encourage people to look at their advance directive
Yeah, to
at
go
least
over it
once a year.
again. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because you're right, your thoughts do change.
Yeah. So the next couple of pages are titled Getting Past the Resistance. As you just said, people don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So maybe somebody seeing this show calls up their adult children and said, I just watched this show on advance directives and I think, why don't you come home for the weekend and let's talk about this?
Yeah.
And what happens often is the adult child will say,
What?
That's depressing. That's morbid.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about this. And so we give
And it's
you
not
little
going to happen
hints.
for a long time.
Right,
You
right.
know?
And
That's what our
sometimes
son
it
said to
flips.
us. I don't want to talk about this, Mom. It's not
Exactly.
going to happen. And I
Yeah.
said, we need to talk about
Yeah.
it.
And it can happen the other way, where the adult children maybe have heard the importance of having an advance directive and understanding what their parents' wishes are. And they broach the subject with the parents. And the parents will say,
don't want to talk about it.
hey, I'm still alive and kicking. They're afraid.
Yeah.
So these 2 pages give you some ways to get the conversation started and get past the resistance, because it isn't like planning a vacation, certainly.
Right.
It's not financial planning or retirement planning or planning for a new child. This is a much more difficult and sensitive topic.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
And it can, having this discussion, I'm looking at number 5 here, it can bring a family closer together, having this discussion.
Oh, absolutely. And it brings such peace of mind. Let me just share a personal story of mine for a moment. About 25 years ago, my mother had been battling lymphoma for a good 15 years. And she was in Dartmouth-Hitchcock back when it was in Hanover still. And she was not doing well at all. It had finally taken over. And the doctor called us all together, my 3 brothers and my dad, and brought us to the room and said, I've been treating your mother for 15 years. He had been her oncologist. And I really don't think that at this point she would want to continue treatment. And for some reason, Sally, I have no idea why, I was the youngest and the only girl, I decided to raise my hand and say, I think you're right. I don't think she would. And so after lots of tears and emotion and talk, we decided to let her go.
Yeah.
And she died later that evening. I got in my car that following morning, to drive back to Rutland, and thought to myself, why in the world did I do that? I had no idea. Did she really want us to let her go? Or would she have wanted us to let her fight one last time? So I had that angst and that guilt for a long time. And we never talked about it. And she had had this illness for such a long time, and we still hadn't discussed it as a family.
Yeah.
So,
And this was a worry you didn't need to have.
I didn't need to have, or anyone in my family. So if we had talked ahead of time, we would have had the peace of mind knowing we were following our mother's direction. And she would have had the peace of mind knowing that if I can't speak for myself, my family knows my wishes and will follow those wishes. And for me, that's the greatest reason right there.
Oh, absolutely.
To go through this book and fill out the advance directive.
Absolutely.
So our next page is, this is harder. It's not multiple choice. If you flip to the next page where it says your personal and spiritual values that are important to you when you make medical decisions.
And these are huge.
We all have our own personal values and our own spirituality. Even though we may not be religious, everyone is spiritual.
Spiritual, right.
And so these questions are a little more difficult. And let me just share a few with you. What are your fears regarding the end of life? Some people aren't afraid of it at all. They think of it as a new journey.
Exactly.
Others are just petrified.
Or seeing some people believe. I believe that my mother and father will be there waiting
for you.
Which makes me feel comfortable. But that's me.
Yeah. Another question is, how do you want to be remembered?
Yes, that's huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
To remember you as you are and not in pain or
Exactly.
That's.
And here's a big one I know for many families. Should financial considerations influence decisions about your medical care? How often do you hear about, just let me go, I don't want to be a financial burden to my family? But, that can be said when you're healthy and things are good. How will you feel? Would you want your family at that point, when you cannot speak for yourself, to try one more treatment or to get you back to health for one more grandchild, one more wedding, one more trip?
And the idea of grandchildren really is huge, because once you have a grandchild, You know, it's interesting. I was at a conference, and it was about this. This was early on, and they went around the room and said, how old do you think you'll be when you die? Just randomly. And I said 86. And then they came around and said, what will you die of? And I said, well, I'll be ready. And I was watching Lily play, and she's now 4. And I thought, 86. Oh my goodness, how old is she going to be there?
Right.
I'll want to be there
That's
longer
right.
than that.
That's right.
You know, and it was so amazing how it changed. You know, my thoughts
What
changed.
a great example. Absolutely.
You know? So
I know I have 6 of them, and I want to be there for every single wedding.
And you will be.
At least. So those are some, thought-provoking questions.
Absolutely.
If you knew you had a life-limiting illness, where would you spend your remaining time? What would you like to be?
You know what?
Oh, I'm sorry. What would you like to be doing, and who would want to be present? So another kind of thought-provoking question.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what's wonderful about this is you don't have to answer them all at once.
Oh, yeah, and you don't have to answer all of them.
Exactly. You just can go through them, open the discussion, start the conversation, and pick it up again later.
Absolutely. Well, this is a process. This isn't going to be, you and your spouse or you and your family member sit down one evening and go through this and then complete your advance directive. There's too much thought, too much talking that needs to go.
That needs to go. Yeah.
Because, you want everybody on board. The communication allows your wishes to happen. Instead of you just sitting by yourself, filling out an advance directive, filing it in the appropriate places, and then some health crisis happens. You haven't shared this advance directive other than with one person.
Yeah.
And now your children are shocked to hear this.
Yeah.
It's a very emotional time. But if you've talked about it ahead of time, then your family is going to say, yes, what my mother put here is what she wants.
Yeah. Yeah. And that takes such a burden.
Oh, absolutely.
Away from everyone. Away from everyone.
So here's my favorite part. This is called the Personal Medical Preferences Test. Because filling out an advance directive means you have to pick an agent. In other words, someone who will speak on your behalf, communicate your wishes in the event that you cannot speak for yourself. Because that's what an advance directive is. If you can speak for yourself, you're
it's
fine.
All right, absolutely.
But if you find yourself unable to, that's when the advance directive and your agent is key.
Okay.
So this is actually 2 tests in this booklet. One you take, and let's just give our viewers an example.
Okay.
Let's say you're taking this test and you're considering me to be your agent.
All right.
So you answer these 10 questions, and I answer the same 10 questions the way I think you would answer them.
Wow.
Then what do? We
compare
the 2. Now, if you're like me and my husband of 42 years, you would think we would be on the same page. Well, guess what? It doesn't always work that way.
It doesn't.
So, but if your answers jive pretty well, you're doing great. That means you've communicated, you know each other well, you understand what each needs. But if out of the 10 questions, let's say you only get 2 right, there's more talking that needs to be done.
More conversation.
It also sometimes opens the eyes of the person thinking, maybe this isn't the person I want to be my agent. Because it doesn't have to be your spouse.
Yeah.
And I hope we'll be able to talk about that a little bit later after we go through the book.
Definitely.
But there are some wonderful questions here. For instance, which of the following do you think Sally fears most near the end of life? And there are 3 answers, possible answers: being in pain, losing the ability to think, or being a financial burden on your loved ones.
Wow.
Now you might answer, oh, I don't want to be a financial burden.
Yeah.
I might answer, oh, I know Sally. She hates pain. She doesn't deal with it well. I'm going to put A. Well, come to find out that really isn't your greatest concern near the end of life. It's being a financial burden. And that would maybe create more discussion about, well, how do we rectify that?
How would that be? And what do we do about that? Yeah.
I don't know if you see any other questions in particular interest to you, but some of them have to do with medical questions, dementia, wanting hospice.
And that's important.
Using your organs, donating your organs. Is that something that you would want?
Absolutely. And that is a discussion that we've had.
That's great.
Which is
You're ahead
really
of the game.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So these are worksheets. You know, these, I call them tests, and they're not really tests because that would place the fear of God in
I
people.
know, in all of us.
But as you pointed out, you know, you don't have to do it all at once.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to do all of them. It just gets you to that point
Gets the
where now I know what I
conversation
want, my family knows what I want, we've had this conversation, now I'm ready to think about who I want as an agent.
Right.
So when you think about picking an agent,
Uh-huh.
should be someone obviously that is an adult, preferably somebody who's not much older than you,
Uh-huh.
someone that you feel would be good in a crisis, someone who can communicate with a doctor. How many people are intimidated by doctors?
Absolutely. So many people.
So you need someone that would be willing
Especially
to...
in our generation.
Because
know.
we put them on a pedestal.
Absolutely.
Somebody who would be able to discuss treatment options with the doctor. Someone
And
that
understand them.
And understand them. That's the hard part.
You know.
Someone good in a crisis. I know one woman was telling me that she had her niece. Her niece was going to be her agent, and there was a health crisis in the family, and she watched the way the niece dealt with it. She had a tough time.
And then she
changed her
realized,
mind.
yeah,
This would not be
yeah.
the person I'd want for my
Exactly.
agent. You should always have at least, well, you have to have one agent, but you should always have at least one backup in case family situations change. This person becomes ill, maybe passes away.
Or they move
before you.
away.
They move away. So you should have an alternative.
Yeah.
And that's really an important piece of completing the advance directive. And of course, you need to ask their permission.
Absolutely.
Right? You
And let
can't
them
just
know that,
let
that
them know
you're
that-
doing this.
Yeah, and that they agree
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah.
Some people don't want that responsibility.
Yeah.
So once you've gone through all of this, then it's time to do your advance
Yes.
directive.
Now we're coming down. We have about a good 6 minutes
Oh,
left.
we have to
so
talk.
I'm going to let you go right into whatever.
Okay, so what is an advance directive? It's a legal document that specifies what you would want for treatment or not want for treatment in the event that you are unable to speak for yourself. In Vermont, it's been called a living will. It's been called an advance, a durable power of attorney for health care.
Living will is easier.
Right, but now Vermont calls all of these documents an advance directive.
Okay.
There's a form that you can get off the Vermont Ethics Network site. You can download it, print it, and complete it. We have one on our site at Rutland Area VNA and Hospice,
And
we
that
have one on
website
this.
is going to be shown on the screen.
Starttheconversationvt.org. We encourage people to try to find it. If they can't download it with no computer, they can call us at the Rutland Area VNA, and we'll make sure they get one.
Oh, that's great.
So you sit down, you fill it out. You do not need a lawyer to fill out an advance directive. You don't even need the form, for that matter. In the state of Vermont, you can put it on the back of a piece of paper, and as long as
And
it's
it doesn't have
witnessed,
to be notarized.
it does not have to be notarized, but it does have to be witnessed by two people.
Can your agent be one of the witnesses?
No, your agent cannot be one of the witnesses. A family member cannot be one of the witnesses. Your health care provider cannot be one of the witnesses.
Oh, all right. That's good to know.
Yeah. But a lot of people do think that you need a lawyer and it needs to be notarized, and you don't.
And it doesn't. Okay.
Once you have completed it, you should make copies. One to your agent, one to your alternate agent, your physician, your healthcare facility or facilities if you go to two different hospitals, family members, and of course keep one for yourself. And please keep one in a place where you can find it.
You said the refrigerator.
Well, you can put it on your refrigerator, but don't put it, in a
Right.
file with a bunch of other papers you can't find. You should then register your advance directive on the Vermont Advance Directive Registry.
Oh.
It's a secure electronic database. Once you have your directive completed, you fill out a form, send it into the Advance Directive Directory, which by the way is in New Jersey, and they will put it on a computer electronically. And so if you're vacationing someplace,
Really?
something happens to you,
Oh, isn't that
and
great?
the healthcare facility can just call it up by number or by name, and they will see what your wishes are as they're
that's
outlined on the
great.
advance
And
directive.
that people can get that information at
They can
on
go to
your
the
website?
Vermont Ethics Network
Okay.
site, or they can go to starttheconversationvt.org.
Uh-huh.
It's wonderful. They also will get either a card with it saying they have an advance directive. Some people have a sticker that they can put on their license, so that if something does happen in a faraway place, they'd be able to see that, just like you have a donor card.
Oh, that's
that kind of
great.
thing.
That's really great. Now, is there any other? I hate to see that we're coming down to the end of the wire, but we have about 4 more minutes.
4 more minutes.
What
Okay.
What would you like to share? Did you want to talk a little bit more about hospice? Or
Well,
what do you think?
I want people to know that hospice is an alternative for end-of-life care. And that's really about quality of life.
Absolutely.
And, you know, in the booklet we have, Sally, some myths about hospice that are common, that they think the hospice is only for cancer patients. Well, it's for anybody with a life-ending illness. It can be Alzheimer's.
Well, my mom had Alzheimer's, and she was a hospice patient.
And she was a hospice
And I would just
patient.
like to share quickly that I was a hospice nurse, and so I was involved. But both my mother, my mother-in-law, and my brother, who recently passed away, were hospice patients. And when you're the recipient of the care, it's so different from when you're giving it. And
I can imagine.
we totally were so grateful because it was so wonderful. You know, every aspect of it was so helpful.
Well, you know, it's very difficult for people. You know, it's a very sensitive topic. They're talking about themselves or a loved one they know they're going to lose. People are in denial sometimes. Again, you know, everybody's different. We've had hospice patients. We had one man come into our agency who had received a terminal illness, had said he was dying, but the doctor didn't say you only have 6 months to live. But he came in and said, when I'm ready, I want hospice. He wanted the most out of the last few months of his life. And we find that a lot of people will come hours. You know, the family will put them on 24 hours.
And there's so much benefit to it that having it, you know, now
earlier.
All of our experiences were we had hospice for a period of time, which helped us through the whole process. You know?
You need the doctor's order, as I said. And statistically, people actually live longer when they're on hospice.
Well, they're more relaxed. They're more comfortable, and they know that their family is being taken care of.
Absolutely.
And it takes that fear and worry from them.
And pain and sickness, getting the treatment. But you know, hospice is not about giving up. It's about increasing the quality of life in your final days.
Yes.
And
see, that's beautiful. Would you say that one more time?
It's not about giving up. It's just about making sure you have the highest quality of life in your final days. We wish that more people saw the benefit of hospice. It's been around a long time. And we have a hospice team that does work here in the Manchester area through Manchester Health Services. We're always happy to answer any questions you don't have to sign up for hospice. You know, if you want to learn more, if you want to become a hospice volunteer, if you want to have a better understanding, we have plenty of people who would just be willing to sit down with you and explain the process and the benefit to you or your loved one.
And people can get in touch with you through your website.
Yes. There are a couple of ways in this area where you can reach hospice services. One is from your local VNA in Manchester, because the Rutland area VNA and Manchester Health Services work together to deliver hospice services.
Oh, that's great.
So they can call either one, or Dorset Nursing as well. For people up in the Rutland area, they would call the Rutland area VNA. To learn more about hospice, they can go on starttheconversationvt.org or www.ravna, which is us.org, and learn about it, because we're living longer, but hospice is needed more than ever.
Absolutely.
You know, many times, you know, years ago, people died quickly from some of the illnesses.
Not today.
Not today.
And also your telephone number, because, you know, some people don't have computers, so.
Right. Our telephone number at Rutland Area VNA and Hospice is 775-0568. At Dorset Nursing, it's 362-1200. Either way, you're going to get somebody.
And we will put that up on the screen so people can at least make the conversation, make the call, and they can start the conversation.
And we encourage you to do so.
Thank you so much,
Sally,
for joining
thank you
me.
for letting me talk so much.
This was so great. This was really, really